Fragment of an Empire is at the very end of Soviet silent cinema, of the golden age, 1929. It is the end and the peak at the same time. So sound came exactly when silent film language was at its best. And silent cinema was able to tell extremely complicated stories. And because this is a very Freudian film, the director Fridrikh Ermler had a mixture. He was a very Freudian personality himself. He was one of the few directors who was a true devoted communist, which does not apply to the majority of Soviet directors. He himself worked in the Cheka, which is the predecessor of KGB, during the revolution. He was active member of the Communist Party. And this is exactly why in his films we see much more truth about the reality of the 20s and even of the 30s, exactly because he was loyal. So he thought that everything that is happening is going the right direction, so he can show even the difficulties of life. And the idea of this film was purely propagandistic, to show the changes that happened in Soviet life through the eyes of a newcomer. It's a story like a little bit of Fridtjof van Winkle. So the main character loses his memory during the First World War because of a shell shock, and then he regains his memory 10 years later. It's in 1928, and it's a new country. It's a new city with new architecture, and the factories belong to the people, no capitalism, and so forth. So the idea was purely propagandistic, but in reality we see a very psychologically complex story, because first of all he catches a glimpse of his wife's face in a bypassing train, and this very famous, maybe the most famous sequence of the film, the regaining of his memory. This is where Ermler's great interest in Sigmund Freud's theories, where he applied it, because we see this whole set of associations, not only visual, but oral ones and audio ones as well in silent cinema. A sewing machine that is, rhythm linked to a machine gun, and so forth. And this is this is a long, 10-minute long, 15-minute long sequence, which is a very complicated Soviet rapid cutting montage editing, and at the same time, which was unique for Soviet silent cinema, a full-fledged method acting.
In short, it's a modern contemporary music, but it's in the traditional style of playing for a silent film. The composer, as the director of the movie, they must have known French film, because I feel that the composer knew the music of Erik Satie for entr'acte, René Clair, because they have the same way of managing to deal with rhythm and repetitions and mechanic movements. So and the way he makes some citations, just to give an idea. Da 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 pa da da pam pam pam. That's all, and it's in minor. It's a Radetzky march. So when he talks about the old society, that's what we do normally, also, especially with this tune, but very, very decently. So that's interesting to discover in the score. Well, I have the work with before in front of me, and I hope we can manage. We have a kind of own restoration. The score does not, and some friends of me told me, typically for Russian scoring, I only have indication moderato, which means, well, it's something in between, or sometimes we have lento or allegro. When I write the music, or if I have this Chaplin score, by example, I have every 3-4 seconds I have an indication of what's going on in the movie, or I have my own metronome, so I know what to conduct. But in here I have nothing. I have, after 5 minutes, I have woman. So my work until now was to make a frame line, a timeline, and with Sibelius to calculating. Here I have an indication of the bars. Here is the first cue. Now I have to calculate the time and the tempo to make out of it. So that was my main work until now. The rest will be found out during the rehearsals.
How many times do you watch this movie?
Well, this I watch now 50 times on detail, from frame to frame, from scene to scene.
And Eisenstein was the godfather of this film. He was the one who saw the first version and told Ermler, you know what, you are a Freudian, why aren't you using it in this film? And then he would reshoot many sequences. But what we see at the end of the film is that in fact, the man with all his very, individual personality is completely crushed by this new system. So this optimism is very dubious. And what really helps us to appreciate it is the music, which was written by Vladimir Deshevov, a very important avant-garde composer. I would not say that he's the level of Shostakovich and Prokofiev, but at the time he was almost as respected as them. And there was a fashion for him. So he was somebody who was older than Ermler. It looks like he was not sympathetic at all of the Soviet regime. And we actually hear much more criticism in the music than we see in the film. There is this completely innocent scene, for example, in the film when the character is taking a shower. And that is a symbolic scene because he is washing away, the old life. And it is a funny scene and maybe a touching one, a moving one, until you see it with the music. And with the music is completely, devilish. Something really evil is happening. We don't know what, but we hear it in the film. So the film was performed with orchestral score just, I assume, for several screenings in 1929. And then the score was not heard for 40 years until the film was re-released in the 60s. But the score was very tangled. It was partially orchestral, partially piano score, and the film was incomplete. So the big discovery for me when I was teaching in the United States, and I got a 16mm print of very bad photographic quality from MoMA, where I saw the missing sequences, the missing footage, and the most famous shot in the whole film was missing. It's a very famous image of Christ in a gas mask, which is a quotation, again, because, Soviet intellectual cinema, a quotation of a drawing by Georg Gross, a very important German expressionist artist. And so when I realized that the shot is everywhere in all the books and magazines and publications about the film, and not in the film itself, we started a big technological comparison. And so there are two opposite challenges when you're dealing with film restoration. When you happen to find an incomplete print of a rare film, you have to deal with this single version. In this case, this was a renowned masterpiece. So there are prints of this film everywhere. I don't know how many versions how many prints and copies I have seen. I guess 20 or something, maybe more, maybe 25. And we ended up finding 9 different versions of the film, because in every single country there was different censorship. And what we had in Russia, and what was considered at Gosfilmofond to be the authentic canonical version, was in fact a version that was chopped down and simplified for distribution in the provinces and villages, for the intellectually primitive audience, because this was the main paradox of Soviet avant-garde. They were maybe making films for the masses, but the masses did not appreciate avant-garde filmmaking, right? So only when we finally put the film back together, it works in all of its complexity.
It's a fantastic movie. It has everything of a good propaganda. It has a good editing, a very astonishing editing. We know it from Eisenstein or other movies, Russian movies. And it has a very, even if it's propaganda, positive way of thinking, of new thinking. It has this love affair, the man who lost his mind, his consciousness, and after 10 years he comes in a new world, but he's still in love with the woman, with his wife, and he rediscovers his wife. And this the new society and what is from the old society, jealousy. So it's a kind of all human thinking and psychology. That's what I like, this mixture.
And adding the music was the final stroke here. So we ended up having, there was a beautiful nitrate in Amsterdam at the Eye Film Museum, and then it was complemented by a nitrate from Switzerland, which had original Russian titles for all reels but one. And then we had all the censorship documents in Russia. And we have to be thankful for the Soviet censors, because there was such a thing as montage list, which is a very accurate description of a film, shot by shot, made not like continuity, made after the film was completed, for the censors. In case something is being cut out, it is being listed in the document. which is an invaluable source for film restorers, of course. So we had this from 1931, a little later than the film was made, but it's pretty accurate. So I think that our restoration is, I would say, 98, 99% accurate, because there was no such thing as an accurate restoration. And so we put back new footage, we added the music, and finally we were dealing with nitrate prints, not with, you know, dupe negatives, which was the case for all the previous releases of the film in the 60s and later on. And, you know, it was teamwork, which was very important for restoration. FIAF archives were extremely supportive. This is where we got the chance to compare 9 versions, and we ended up using material from 2 archives and comparing with others. And it was done by 3 institutions, I would even say 4, because it was mostly conducted by the Film Fund of Russia, by the iFilm Museum, and by the San Francisco Silent Film Festival. And of course it was crucial to have the print from Cinémathèque Suisse. I did all the research on the textological comparison, but the real restoration work, you know, all the grading and then the search for a proper font, and you know, when we had to pick the best image in case of several prints. This was all done by Rob Byrne. So yeah, and I think it is the first time in quite a while when there was a proper textological restoration of a Russian film. We have rediscoveries, we have, you know, new prints are being made, new DCPs, but I think Eisenstein was the only one whose films actually, you know, went through this procedure, and this has to be done with more Russian films. This is why we have so many prints, because the film was popular and it was screened widely in Germany and in France and in the United States and in Amsterdam. This is why there's so many versions, and everywhere there was different censorship. No, I would say that Ermler is one of the greatest Soviet directors, and this is not, you know, my discovery. He was appreciated and spoken very highly of by, you know, by Charlie Chaplin, by Pabst, by Eisenstein, if we're talking about his, you know, the native Russian friends. So he was a very big name, and not only in silent cinema. I would say that he remained big until his very death, until the 1960s. There is now a significant revival of interest in him. Not the first one. There were waves in the 60s and then the 80s, now is another one. So I hope that this restoration would actually start, you know, a new Ermler campaign. He really deserves it.
That this movie at that age was really effective for communism, for propaganda, or not? No,
that is a very good question. The film was intended to be communist propaganda and was treated as such by people who were highly sympathetic of the Soviet Union. But what makes it a great work of art is that there are many ways of approaching it. There was an excellent review in Close Up, one of the best periodicals of the time, which said that film has a very strange philosophy. We really see how this main character is being crushed by the new architecture, by the new lifestyle. And I remember the phrasing, yes, a new man is born, but something else has died. And the lovely Eisenstein type is turned into a proletarian Adolf Manju. And, you know, and this is not something which was made up by a film historian 50 years later. This was written in 1930, right after the film was released. And I think it is the best thing that can happen to a work of art, any kind of art, not only cinema, is when you can have completely opposite polar approaches to it. You know, when something works, when there's just one way to decipher, you know, to describe, to explain a film, then it is primitive. So this is, and you know, and the film is still being discussed. When I screened the film in Russia, I had completely opposite, you know, opinions of people in the audience. That it is, you know, blatant communist propaganda, yes, well made, well edited, but completely straightforward and stupid. And that this is a horrifying anti-Soviet picture. Why wasn't he arrested for this? One thing that I can say that the Soviets, not only in silent era, they were obsessed with the idea of realism, whatever it means. And there was a different concept of realism all the time. And this film, it is beautiful because there is a combination of completely documentary shots with something very utopian, and not only in the idea of the film, because, you know, they wanted to show the new city life, the new cities, mostly with this constructivist architecture in the style of Le Corbusier. And there was not enough of such architecture in St. Petersburg and Leningrad. So in fact, part of the film is being filmed in Leningrad and part is being filmed in Ukraine. And they're building a hybrid city with new architecture, a non-existent city like a new Soviet metropolis. So it is in fact showing you know, a very utopian thing, and at the same time we have the real streets of Kharkiv, a Ukrainian town, with real crowds on the streets, with real crowds in the tram, with professional actors among them, and some of those professional actors are playing bit parts and appear just for 2 seconds, which was a great thing in Soviet cinema. You really needed great actors to do that bit of acting. Acting here is remarkable because the wife who has a small part is Liudmila Semionova, who is a legendary star. Most of us know her in Bed and Sofa, one of the most well-known Soviet films. And then this extremely strange figure of the former owner of the factory, who is the only one who feels sympathy towards the main character, who doesn't try to rebuild him, remodel him, but has some human feelings. And he is playing a class enemy, a capitalist. And the actor who is playing this part is Ermler's teacher, Viacheslav Viskovskii, a pre-revolutionary film director who was a symbol of the art they all hated, and who was out of job, and this was a way of giving him, you know, helping him making a living. But then, you know, see somebody from the old revolutionary Russia, he's playing himself, and all the sympathy is, you know, in his side. So what is great about great works of art is that they are always wider than the initial idea. I am sure that Ermler's intentions were much more primitive than what he achieved, which was always the case of him, and this is why he's a great director. You cannot really formalize him, nor the films he made.
Grazie.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.